Thanks for joining us, everybody. We've got a couple minutes until we hit 10 o'clock and we're letting people in. So good to see you all and just hang tight. We'll get going soon.
You got all these bracelets on your arm like it's your passion.
All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. Can you see me and the slides okay? Give me a thumbs up. All right. So see a few thumbs ups there. I want to welcome everybody today. Welcome to Getting the Most from Indiana's new eviction ceiling law for tenants, housing providers, and community organizations. I'm Andrew Bradley, Senior Director of Policy and Strategy for Prosperity Indiana. We're going to have a chance to get to hear from some of the preeminent experts in housing law throughout the state, as well as practitioners. And let's start now. We have a few people who are going to continue to join us, but let's go ahead and
Andrew, you're muted on my end.
Well, there we go. So let's take a step. And everything I said before, nobody heard that. So let me just start over from the beginning. Welcome, everybody. You've joined us for Getting the Most from Indiana's new eviction ceiling law for tenants, housing providers, and community organizations. Brought to you by Prosperity Indiana in partnership with Indiana Legal Services and the Indiana Bar Foundation. I'm Andrew Bradley, Senior Director of Policy and Strategy with Prosperity Indiana. We are lucky to be joined by some of the preeminent experts from the legal and the programmatic perspective of housing in the state today. They're going to introduce themselves and their organizations more in full later, but we're pleased to be joined by Mike Commons of Indiana Bar Foundation, Jennifer Terry of Indiana Legal Services, and my colleague Danielle Drew of Prosperity Indiana. So let me tell you about Prosperity Indiana if you're not familiar with us. Our legal name since 1986 has been the Indiana Association for Community Economic Development. And after being confused for a state agency for many years, we took on this moniker Prosperity Indiana. And we are still that statewide association for the individuals and organizations who are strengthening Hoosier people and places, who are working on the ground to improve Indiana's communities. So we're a statewide organization with a diverse network. As it says there, we've been around for almost 40 years. We serve about 200 organizations and over 1,300 professionals who are representing affordable housing developers, financial institutions, local governments, health systems, and an array of human service providers. And we'd love to have you be part of our network. We tell our members that we provide services in a REAP format. So we provide all of our members with resources, engagement, advocacy, and programs. Our members serve all 92 Indiana counties. You can see the wide spectrum of those members here on this slide. We'd love to have you part of that conversation. And so you see a link here. And I think with the format that we're using today, you should be able to use the links you see on the screen live. So you can try that out yourself. We'd love for you to click that link and join us as a member. If for some reason that doesn't work, you will get a copy of these slides after today's webinar. So don't worry, you're going to have that on hand. Oh, people are saying they can't see slides. Danielle, can you see slides?
Yes. So when they entered, there should have been a prompt for them to view the slides when they entered. If not, we can change and you could share, the other way, Andrew, in case people are having trouble. So.
I wonder if just to avoid issues, maybe let's go ahead and pause and let me do it the traditional way. Does that sound okay?
Definitely.
All right. So give me just a second here. All right. Now I can't see you, but Danielle, can you tell me, can you see the slides now?
Yeah, we can still
All
see
right. So let's start over from the top. No, we're going to skip right ahead back to where we were before about this is who Prosperity Indiana is. I want to talk a little bit before we jump into this specific eviction ceiling law, why our network cares so much about housing instability and how we got involved in the advocacy around Senate Bill 142. So as I mentioned, we have a really broad spectrum of members who are involved in housing and economic opportunity one way or another. And our members tell us from their experience that Indiana has a lack of supply of safe, affordable, and accessible housing. And it is those members' experience that tells us that that those issues are driving Indiana's housing crisis. And they're right. We've done the research. We've worked with national partners and crunched the numbers and have found that Indiana has one of the lowest rates of affordable and available housing for the lowest income renter households in the entire Midwest. So you can see here on this screen, Indiana has a gap of over 137,000 affordable and available homes that are needed for the state's 220,000 extremely low-income households. Those are households that are making at or below 30% of area median income. And that's what the graphic on the left shows. It shows that Indiana's housing gap really is driven by the gap of what's available for the lowest income households. So that rate of 38 affordable and available homes for every 100 extremely low-income households is below average for the Midwest and below average for the U.S. In addition, we know that nearly 2/3 of those extremely low-income households in Indiana are spending more than half of their income on housing costs. So that lack of supply is really driving the shortage statewide. In addition, we know that affordable housing is out of reach for too many Hoosiers, that the increasing cost of housing isn't keeping up, the incomes aren't keeping up with that increasing cost of what it takes to afford housing. This is as of brand new data that just came out in July 2025 that shows that it takes $22.18 an hour for a renter household in Indiana to be able to afford a modest 2-bedroom home. That's what we call the state's housing wage. $22.18 is what it takes. However, over on the left, you can see that the average renter in Indiana only makes $18.05 an hour. So that's a gap of over $4 an hour between what the typical renter makes and what's needed to afford a basic 2-bedroom place to live. So we know that most families, they're going to do what it takes to keep a roof over their head. They're going to cut down. They're going to skip medications. They're going to skip doctor's visits. They may have parents skipping meals so that they can feed their kids and pay the rent. But somewhere along the line, they're not able to make all their basic needs meet. And that's where we find that too many Hoosier families are then having to make do with inadequate housing. They're either in a place that's too small for them, but it meets standards, or they're finding that they don't have other choices but to rent from substandard housing. And this gets to a policy issue that Prosperity Indiana has been tracking for many years. That's why we got involved in this conversation. And that's why we have formed 3 issue-based coalitions for us to help address Indiana's lack of housing and economic opportunity. So the issues we're talking about today really fit into what you see on the left, the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition. We created this coalition from Indiana's housing advocacy community back in 2020. It addresses issues of housing safety, stability, affordability, and paths to home ownership. So at the end of today's conversation, we'll give you a link. We would love to have everyone on this webinar join us today. In addition, if you're interested in issues of economic opportunity and in consumer protections, you can use that same link to join us in the 2 other coalitions here. Just wanted to set the scene for why we're involved in this issue. And even though SCA 142 passed this year, it has roots that go back several years before. So our legal experts are going to tell you more in a moment exactly what the law says and what this new law does and how it applies. But in terms of the advocacy behind it, SCA 142 that just passed or became law this year, it strengthens an eviction ceiling law that Prosperity Indiana and the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition had been advocating for since at least 2020. And in 2022, we successfully advocated to create that eviction ceiling law in House Bill 1214 from that year. So we were able to gain and get a toehold for eviction ceiling in Indiana. But that initial law, we weren't able to be involved in the full development of it, and it had some flaws that you're going to hear about later. It had some holes in the process. We wanted Indiana's eviction ceiling law to be much more automatic so that families would not end up with what we call the scarlet E of an eviction filing that follows them from place to place and prevents them from being able to rent a safe, decent, affordable place to live. But even despite those limitations, that initial eviction ceiling law has allowed over 31,000 households to be able to seal their eviction records. They had to proactively go to court and apply to have those eviction records sealed. But that's a lot. That's 31,000 is bigger than a lot of county seats throughout the state. So imagine, whole communities in Indiana have had their lives improved because of this law between July 2022 and December 2024. So after that eviction ceiling law took effect, some of our partners, including the Indiana Justice Project and the Notre Dame Law School's Eviction Law Clinic, evaluated that eviction ceiling law, looked at the benefits, but also looked at where it fell short and where it could be strengthened. And they took that report to State Senator Liz Brown from Fort Wayne and showed her the benefits that the laws had and also where it needs to be strengthened. And Senator Brown took those recommendations as the basis for Senate Bill 142 that she authored this past session of the Indiana General Assembly. And it can be really challenging to pass tenant strengthening laws at the General Assembly, but this bill got a lot of support. It got broad bipartisan support. It passed unanimously in the Senate. It passed with only a couple of votes against in the House. It was signed by Governor Mike Braun after the end of the session, and it became law and took effect this past July. So that really brings us to where we are today. We have this new law on the books that we hope will strengthen the original law, and we're going to find out exactly what the law does and how it can be applied to tenants, housing providers, and the community service organizations who serve them all. So with that, let me introduce Jennifer Terry. of Indiana Legal Services. Jennifer, I'm going to leave it to you to talk about ILS and why you've gotten involved in SCA 142.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. For those of you who aren't familiar with Indiana Legal Services, we are a not-for-profit law firm. We serve income eligible Hoosiers, so low-income Hoosiers throughout the state. We have 8 offices statewide. We serve every county in the state. Generally, we are focused on helping Hoosiers with legal issues that affect their basic needs. So housing, safety, food, medical or personal safety issues. So housing work is a large part of what we do. And I want to thank all of you for participating and learning about eviction sealing today and the new changes, because it really is a issue where community partners can play a big impact. As Andrew said, we have trouble meeting all the need that's out there. And so this is a great issue where community partners can really help people navigate and connect with resources. So Andrew, let's go forward. Andrew gave you a great bit of background. I just want to talk a little bit, just level set, make sure we're all starting on the same page. What do we mean when we talk about eviction sealing? Sometimes it's called eviction expungement, but basically what we're talking about is making a case confidential in the court's public records. So many of you might be familiar with the My Case system, which is the court's public registry of all cases. It doesn't change, eviction sealing doesn't change what might be reported to other agencies like a credit reporting agency or some sort of third-party site. And as Andrew mentioned, prior to 2022, we didn't have an eviction sealing law. And I guess this is a good place to mention that the harm from eviction cases really starts at the moment the case is filed. And that's partially because the internet has made access to court records so much, more widespread and easier than it used to be. And, a prospective landlord, a future landlord, is likely to run a tenant's name through My Case to see what pops up. And they don't necessarily take the time to look into what actually happened in that case. Was it resolved because the tenant got caught up on rent? Was it actually maybe found to be favorable to the tenant and dismissed? It's just the very act of filing that eviction case serves as Andrew said, as our social scientists who've studied this call it the scarlet E that kind of brands the tenant as a bad tenant. And it doesn't matter if that happened 20 years ago, 5 years ago, 1 year ago, all of these records were available to the public on My Case. So let's go to the next slide, Andrew. I wanted to share just a little bit of data with you about, how much eviction activity are we seeing in Indiana, and it's quite a bit. These next couple of slides are from an organization called Eviction Lab. They take the they take publicly available information from court filings as to how many eviction cases are filed, and have a very nice website where they share all that information. Indiana is one of the places that they track. They have several other geographic areas where the information's available that they track, and I just wanted to kind of share some of that with you. So this is information from the 12 months ending June of 2025. So statewide, Indiana had a 9% filing rate, eviction filing rate. So that means about 9% of all renters in the state over the past 12 months have had an eviction filed. And in terms of number of cases, it was over 71,000 cases, so 71,000 households. Andrew, let's go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, Eviction Lab looks at a couple of areas within the state. South Bend is one of them. This is the trend for South Bend for the past 12 months. In South Bend, there's a 9% eviction filing rate. And then the next one, Andrew, I think is the Indianapolis slide. Maybe we're missing or skipped the Indianapolis slide, but it has a 14% filing rate. You know, it would be considered a hot spot in terms of eviction activity in the state. This slide shows the racial, ethnic, and gender disparities that are apparent in the eviction filings. And so the way this slide is set up is South Bend on one side and Indianapolis on the other. The orange bars show the amount of eviction filing by demographic, and then the blue bars show how much of that demographic is in the population as a whole. So in both communities, Black people have a higher rate of eviction, and also females also have a slightly higher disproportionate rate of eviction in their communities. We also know from some other studies that children are one of the largest demographics that experience eviction. And so for all of these reasons, that kind of causes us to pivot, and you can go to the next slide, Andrew, as to why eviction ceiling is so important to part of this, addressing this folks having stable housing. So as we mentioned a couple times, Indiana didn't have eviction ceiling law at all before 2022. So all of these eviction cases, regardless of the outcome, were part of the public record. And so in 2022, I've got the statute cites in here. It said that some eviction cases would be eligible for ceiling, not all. And the process was dependent on the tenant taking action to petition the court to have their records sealed. It also did require landlords to file a motion to dismiss if a case was resolved before what we would call final adjudication. This kind of gets into some of the process of eviction cases, and that they're usually bifurcated, and there's a first hearing about possession and a second hearing that can be about getting a monetary judgment. And so a lot of cases kind of get resolved at that first hearing. And so that's where kind of having this motion to dismiss filed was helpful in kind of being part of this eviction sealing process. And then finally, the initial law said that a tenant could petition if there's been more than 180 days, so 6 months of inactivity, that a tenant could petition to have a case dismissed and sealed at that point. So let's go to the next slide, where just a little more background in terms of the kinds of cases that could be dismissed under the 2022 law. So they were ones where if they were dismissed, if it was an outcome in favor of the tenant, or if it was vacated on appeal. Those were the three categories of cases that could be sealed. It didn't matter if the outcome occurred prior to the law going into effect or being passed in 2022. So that was a very good thing about the initial law. And generally, it required the tenant to take action to formally petition and file a formal request with the court. So going forward and looking at then the 2025 law and the changes that were made there, one of the big changes was that it allowed courts to automatically seal cases which were in those three categories. So the original three categories of the law, if the case was dismissed, if the judgment was in favor of the tenant, or if it was overturned or vacated on appeal. So instead of making a tenant file paperwork asking for that, it allows courts to automatically seal cases, and that's going to apply mostly to just current cases, new cases that are filed. There's no even though cases that occurred prior to 2025 or 2022 can still be sealed, that there isn't actually a technological way, we learned, unfortunately, to go back and kind of get the automatic sealing for those cases. But it's still a very helpful step that kind of addresses new cases as they're coming up. The second change in the law was that it specifically states that a case can be sealed or made confidential if a monetary judgment was entered, but the tenant has satisfied that monetary judgment. So it remains the case, and initially and today, that a case where there is a monetary judgment saying that the tenant owes the landlord money, that is a case that cannot be sealed. But if the tenant has, subsequent to that judgment being entered, paid off the judgment, then the law says, that case should be treated as any other case where there's no monetary judgment out there, and allowing for those cases to be sealed. And then the third change in the law is that sometimes tenants are evicted for reasons other than being behind on rent. So criminal activity or destruction of property would be two common examples in that category. And if that was the basis for eviction, the new law provides that those tenants would have to wait 7 years before their case could be sealed. Andrew, let's go to the next one. And I thought that maybe it would be helpful just to kind of talk practically about a few common fact patterns in terms of what types of cases can be sealed and which still cannot be sealed. So a common fact pattern of a case that can be sealed is where the tenant voluntarily vacates and the landlord doesn't seek a damages hearing. So as I mentioned previously, a lot of these eviction cases are what we would call bifurcated, and they take place in 2 hearings. The first hearing is about whether the landlord is entitled to regain possession of the rental property, or whether or not the tenant is allowed to stay in the rental property and continue their tenancy to the end of their lease. And so in some cases, if the tenant is so far behind on rent that they really can't get caught up, the outcome of that possession hearing, that first hearing, may be that the tenant says, I'm going to voluntarily move out of the rental property, give the possession back to the landlord. Many times landlords don't necessarily want to go to that second hearing where they obtain a monetary judgment against the tenant. And so that's a very common fact pattern. And that's a instance of a case that can be sealed. Another common fact pattern is that the tenant is behind on rent, but they get caught up. So many times the tenant just needs a little more time, or sometimes there aren't a lot of rental resources, rental assistance resources out there these days, but sometimes they can access those and they get caught up on rent. And so in that case, they've cured the violation of the lease. The landlord is satisfied. They got the rent, which was what they were looking for, and the case gets dismissed. And so that can be sealed. And then the third bullet here is just other situations where the outcome of the eviction is favorable to the tenant. So might be a dispute over whether or not the tenant has paid rent, and the tenant comes in and shows the receipts that they did pay, or an example of maybe where rent wasn't the reason for the eviction filing, that it was some conduct, and the tenant is able to show that they did not do the conduct that is accused of, breaching the lease. So that would be another example of a type of case that can be sealed. Cases that can't be sealed, the most common fact pattern is where there is a judgment owed. So the tenant is behind on rent, and the landlord took the case to that second hearing and reduced that rent to a monetary judgment. As I mentioned previously, if the tenant does satisfy that judgment, that pay off that monetary judgment subsequently, it can be sealed. But unless and until the tenant does that, it would still be viewable on the record. So we can go forward to the next slide, Andrew. So just in kind of wrapping up, this is my contact information. If I can answer any questions, or if you feel like there's a role for Indiana Legal Services to play, please let us know. We have been involved in helping tenants file eviction sealing petitions, and we'll continue to do that. We're also obviously interested in how the law is being implemented, and if folks are seeing issues in their communities, we'd want to know to see if we could be resources in educating or helping tenants address those issues and sealing their cases. We're really so far, we've received really positive feedback in terms of how the law is being implemented. So we're really pleased that eviction sealing could take another step forward and make it more streamlined for folks. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike Commons with the Indiana Bar Foundation. Mike's going to say a little information about himself and his organization, but also show you the resources that are really helpful for tenants to use if they do need to file a petition to seal their eviction.
Thanks a lot, Jenny. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Commons. I'm the Indiana Legal Help Manager here at the Indiana Bar Foundation. And I see a question popped up. Jenny, do you want to go ahead and take that real quick? I mean, I'm happy to let you do that. I think it's a relevant question, and it relates to exactly what you were just chatting about.
Sure. I think the question was, how are courts implementing the automatic eviction sealing? And so what's anticipated is really when that landlord files the motion to dismiss is the most common sort of procedural action that would trigger that eviction sealing. They have to, enter some sort of order ruling on the motion to dismiss. And so while they're ruling on the motion to dismiss, they just also include in that order that the case will be sealed as well. So I probably should have spent a little bit more time in kind of talking about the procedural aspects of how this worked. So, that was really one of the main reasons for this new law is to streamline the process and to make it that the tenant has to file petitions to do this eviction sealing in fewer cases. So that's the idea, is to sort of take what had after the 2022 law become a fairly accepted practice in many courts of sealing things and tried to make that more streamlined, more automatic, so that we don't have this process where, some tenants would be able to access resources and get their cases sealed and other, tenants wouldn't. So that's a little bit about how, it's happening now, which we think is a good thing for all the parties. It saves the court time, tenants' time, landlords' time, and all of that. And so with that, I'll pass it back over to Mike, but we are going to have a little roundtable and question and answer section later. So if people do have more questions, be happy to answer them then.
Thanks, Jenny. And by the way, that's an excellent question. Very, very good question. So as I was saying, Indiana Legal Help Manager, I work for the Indiana Bar Foundation. The Bar Foundation is a nonprofit that really focuses on two main topics. One is civic education. So the Bar Foundation operates the We the People program you may be aware of, mock trial competition, as well as we have provided some significant educational lesson material for sixth grade middle school civics education course that the Indiana legislature passed a couple of sessions ago as a mandatory class now. And so we've intentionally made some materials available for teachers who can get that information and be able to teach those classes. But beyond that, the other half is focused on supporting civil legal aid in Indiana. That is mostly done through the provision of funding, grant dollars that are provided to civil legal aid organizations in Indiana, like Indiana Legal Services, where Jenny works, as well as a whole host of others that are located around the state, various communities. But in addition to that, we also operate IndianaLegalHelp.org, which is a website that is focused on providing connections for the public to get hooked up with organizations like ILS or those other civil legal aid outfits around the state, to get connected with them through representation, to get connected with them through free civil legal aid clinics, also to get access to free legal information about various legal issues, especially in point of fact for today's discussion, information about eviction. And that information can include also self-help legal forms that users can complete. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen here, and all I have to do is find the particular one I want, which is this one. And give me a thumbs up, Danielle, if this is visible. Oh, awesome, great, okay. So as I mentioned, this is a live view of IndianaLegalHelp.org, and this is what anyone will see when they come to IndianaLegalHelp.org, whether you are a person who is facing eviction, whether you're a person who has faced eviction in the past and you want to get that dealt with, whether you're one of you folks. So we at Indiana Legal Help refer to you folks as partners or helpers because you're sort of at the intersection between the folks that are facing these issues and providing some sort of service. And so as helpers, we want to be able to train you up and have you be familiar with what IndianaLegalHelp.org can provide, so that in case you are coming across and serving someone who could benefit from the information provided here, that you're able to sort of quickly and easily show them what it is and what's available and how to navigate through it. So I'm going to quickly run through what IndianaLegalHelp.org is and does. So as I mentioned, our primary number one goal is to get people connected to professionals, legal professionals, who can help them, because the best way for you to resolve any legal issue is if you've got somebody who knows what they're doing already. So in order to do that, we first start sending people towards this Get Legal Help button here. So if a user or a partner like you clicks into this, they're given an option to add a zip code or a county where they live, where their issue is. So we'll try Hancock County, and if they've got a housing issue, then they can further sort of filter their search by the legal issue, and then say get results. And what they're going to be provided is two lists of information. One is going to be organizations that assist folks who are facing these issues, and then the other is a list of upcoming events. And so let's click into this organizations first. We can see here that we're provided a list of legal service providers. So we've got Indiana Legal Services Indianapolis, we've got the Indianapolis Legal Aid Society, Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic, and if a user wants to click into a particular organization, they're taken to a page here that shows the name, a sort of a description of who they are and what they do. There is a website link, location, phone number, hours of operation, counties served, and the different types of legal issues they provide assistance with. And then lastly, for some of our organizations, then we actually have a link or a button here where the user can click on this and be taken directly to the online application process to be able to potentially get representation from this civil legal aid provider. We find that to be the best possible way to get somebody services, to get them directly connected with a civil legal aid provider. In addition to the organizations, as I mentioned, we have a list of upcoming free legal clinics. And so by clicking on this, the user is shown specific events that are focused on the area that they live in, so their community. So for example, in this case, we've got Lawyers in the Library, a walk-in clinic, and that's scheduled for tomorrow evening. And a user could click into this and see what it is, sort of a description of the kind of process, where it is, date, time, who's operating that particular clinic, and the types of assistance, types of legal issues they're going to be able to get assistance with by going to this clinic. And you can see these run up in sort of chronological order, most recent first, and these continue on. Some of those are going to be in person, for example, like the one we just clicked on. Some of them are going to be a hybrid clinic where you can either attend in person here at this location, or you can attend by clicking on a Zoom link and registering at the Calendly link here, and then being able to attend remotely by Zoom. And then there are some that are purely remote. So again, here we have a remote clinic. So in addition to the primary help, which is getting somebody connected to a legal professional, we also have the ability for folks to do some self-help. So if a user knows that they need information about a housing issue and they know it's an eviction-related issue, they can click in, and on this rent and eviction page, the user is provided with two sets of information. One is going to be forms that can be filled out. The other is going to be helpful resources and tools. And so this list over here is going to be information or links to some of our other partners who provide additional services or information. And so, for example, this link here is a link to the Indiana Justice Project's Tenant Habitability Guide, and this provides a user can click on this link and they'll be taken to the Indiana Justice Project's Habitability Guide PDF, where they can access information about any habitability concerns they may have regarding the place that they're currently living in. Some other information, here's the Indiana Renters Guide, and a short video about knowing your rights as an Indiana renter. But if they want to get access to the eviction sealing form because perhaps their circumstance falls into one of the situations, as Jenny mentioned, that isn't going to be an automatic seal, automatic case where case is automatically sealed, but instead is one where they need to file something because they've either paid off a money judgment after the fact, or it's been a certain number of years after their issue has been resolved, they can come into the eviction sealing form. And here they can read about what the eviction sealing form is, what kinds of situations qualify for use of the eviction sealing form. And then as we scroll down, we can find the ability for the user to download blank PDFs, forms for the eviction sealing. They come with instructions, and these PDFs are fillable, so the user can simply click into the blank and type in the information that needs to go in that blank. They can print those off, take them to the courthouse, and file them in order to attempt to get their eviction case sealed. These forms existed before this year, but when the law changed, as Jenny mentioned, we worked specifically with Jenny to ensure that the forms that we have available today reflect the current change in law, so that those users are focused on getting the specific kinds of help they need under the current law. Let's see, backing out of this. In addition to being able to utilize court forms, we also have in the bottom right corner here this chat bubble, which is our Indiana Legal Help bot. Now, at this point, the bot does not make use of artificial intelligence like some bots do, but what it does do is if a user has a housing issue, they're able to so make that selection, and then they're provided with a list of different ways they can use to communicate with our navigators, our housing navigators that work for us. They can choose to use an online contact form, which is a web form. So if I click on this, it will simply bring up some fields that I can type in my name, my email address, and what my issue is. That will generate a ticket that gets sent over to our ticketing queue, and one of our navigators who's working live will begin to respond to that. Asynchronously, the response will come back to the email address that was listed. And that's sort of the same type of process. If they chose email, they'd be provided with an email address that they could then send an email to with their issue listed, and that would again generate a ticket that our navigators would respond to, and their response would come back to that email address. All of these various channels are set up so that whichever method the user chooses to communicate, whatever channel they use to communicate in, the response coming back from the live navigators or the human navigators will come back in that same channel. So for example, if they selected text, they'd be provided with an SMS number that from their cell phone they could text a message, text a question to about whatever their housing issue is, and the navigator would get a ticket generated. They'd create their response, and when the navigator clicked submit or send, as far as the response, it would come back to the user as an SMS to their cell phone. Chat with a navigator is a live chat within this actual window here, just like you would see on any number of various different websites where you can sort of chat live with somebody. And that's synchronous, so it's happening live. And then last but not least, call. So if the user selects this, they'll be provided with a telephone number that from their cell phone or phone, otherwise they could place a telephone call during the hours of 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Both the call and the live chat with a navigator are during those hours, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And they could place a call, and that call would ring in, and a navigator would, who's wearing a headset like me, would have the opportunity then to take that call and provide live assistance and information to the caller about their housing legal issue. We also have non-housing information available in the legal help bot, but really this is just another means of us helping the user navigate through the website to get access to the same information I've described about finding a lawyer or finding a legal clinic, finding legal information about a particular topic, or finding a form. Let me stop sharing here, or actually before I stop sharing, to say, does anybody have any questions that I can answer while I've got the website pulled up right now? Happy to do that. I'll go ahead and stop sharing. I can do that again if I need to. Let's see, Danielle or Andrew. I think we're going to get back to the slideshow here in a second. Everybody's got patience with us.
All right, thanks so much, Mike. We're getting back to the point in the slides. Now we're going to turn it over to my colleague Danielle to have a community discussion. Oh, I see we have these last couple of slides. I'm sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no worries.
Go for it.
Excellent. So last bit I wanted to chat about was, so I mentioned we've got the website, but there are some users out there in our communities who don't have access to internet-connected devices. And so the Bar Foundation, with funding from the Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority over the past couple of years, worked diligently to get access to and manufacture 150 Indiana Legal Help kiosks. And if you look at the left side of this slide, we have 100 kiosks that are these freestanding kiosks that appear that sort of look like ATM machines here a bit, and then 50 that are the desktop type, so a monitor with a printer. And those kiosks, 150 kiosks, are located all around the state of Indiana, with at least one in every single county. If we look on the right-hand side here, you can see a map. This is just Marion County, and so you can see where all of the particular locations in Marion County are. The icons with the little black circle with a gavel, those are located in a courthouse, and these all happen to be located in small claims courts. And again, our intention there was to get them placed in locations where folks who are having the most sort of common issues, so housing issues and consumer debt related issues, we'll be able to get them access to them in those courthouses. But in addition, we've got in the city center there in downtown, we've got one located at the Central Library with that little sort of open book. And then the last, I guess, sort of yellow with the dot in the middle, those are sort of alternative locations. And so we've got one place in the Damien Center. We've got one located inside our building, in the English Foundation building, that's in the offices of the Indianapolis Legal Aid Society. And then the two that are sort of west side of downtown and on West 38th Street, those are both located at Eskenazi. So one is at the Eskenazi Hospital, and then the other is at Eskenazi Community Health Center on West 38th Street. And again, our intention there is to try and get these in locations where folks who are going to be having these types of issues are going to be going for one or various reasons, in an effort to try and get them access to all of the same information that the website provides, but provides it to them if they don't have access to an internet-connected device or don't have access to a printer. So if they access any of the information from our website, whether it's the listing of a legal organization and they want to print off that listing form, if it's information about a legal clinic and they want to print off that page that shows when, where, and what time, if they want to print off any of our legal forms, free legal forms, both the key types of kiosks have printers embedded within them, so that a user can get access to sort of free printing off of all of that information to take with them. And this is especially helpful for those that are located in the courthouse, so your user can go to the courthouse, fill out a form, hit print, and literally walk around the corner to the clerk's office and hand that completed form to be filed in their case. And then the last slide is just our contact information. So again, my name is Mike Commons. I'm the Indiana Legal Help Manager. Jason Thies also works with us, and he is our help desk and kiosk manager. He's sort of the wizard of all things technical. And here's a link to our website. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks again, Mike. And let me just say that Prosperity Indiana has recently been on our round of regional meetings throughout the state. And it was great to go to the Jeffersonville Public Library and see a kiosk there. And in the past, we've been at the Morgan County Public Library in Martinsville and seen one there. So these resources really are across the state, and really thank you for walking through us to that. So with that, let me turn it back over to my colleague, Danielle.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Jenny and Mike, for sharing your expertise. I know everybody on the call here is probably thrilled to hear this new information. So I just want to start by saying my name's Danielle Drew. I'm the Housing Stability Program Manager at PI. And I wanted to see if we could have a little bit of a discussion about what we've talked about and learned today. And so I am going to use Mentimeter for those of you who are familiar. Let me share the next slide here. You can join by either using your cell phones and scanning that QR code, or you can go directly to www.menti.com and enter that code there. And so I'm going to give you guys just a moment here to get started on that, and then I'm going to share my screen for the Mentimeter. All right, can everyone see the screen? You guys just want to give me a thumbs up or a head nod? Yeah, okay, great, thank you guys. All right, so our first question, well, here's the instruction screen in case someone has not been able to scan that QR code or have the code there at the top. All right. So we are going to type one word or phrase about Indiana's new eviction ceiling law. So one word to describe kind of what you learned today, how you're feeling about it, what you think. All right. Yeah, we're seeing some good answers here. So hopeful, better, automatic, wonderful, hopeful. Hopeful's getting bigger. That means we have more than one person entering that one. All right. So glad, promising, exciting, wonderful. Yeah. Step in the right direction, relief, expansion, step forward, improved, game changer. Yep. Yeah. So it looks like most, the kind of the biggest words here means that they've been entered more than once. So that's going to be that hopeful, the progress, exciting and better, promising. All right. Thank you guys so much for that feedback. I'm going to go ahead and move forward to this next one. And feel free to keep entering there. All right. So how will you or your organization use the information that was provided in this webinar? And so you have the opportunity to split up 100 points across these different options. And so the first one there is referring tenants to Indiana Legal Help website or the kiosk to self-file, increasing awareness in your community, directly supporting tenants through the process, advocacy to strengthen tenant protections, and then referring tenants to legal aid providers such as ILS for assistance in filing. So how will you most likely use it? All right. Give you guys a second here. Looks like a lot of us. Yeah.
It's like a horse race. You see the different horses taking the lead and dropping back. And I'm keeping my eye out on the advocacy part too.
Yes, yes. All right. Yeah, we're still moving. We have quite a few people. Well, it looks like we have about 36 people, and about 18 of them have answered this question. All right. So it looks like increasing awareness in your community is really kind of taking the lead here and referring tenants to Indiana Legal Help or the kiosk for self-filing. Yeah. And then, of course, we have our practitioners that are going to be supporting tenants through the process. Yeah. Great feedback, guys. Gives us a feel for how you're going to be using this moving forward and who we have on the call. So, all right. So I have one more question here for you guys. So are there any challenges or barriers that you foresee for yourself or the population you serve in using this new bill to seal their evictions? And this is, you can write a text in there if you see any kind of challenges or barriers that you could see, for anyone using these services. If not, that's great. But I thought this would be a good way to wrap it up. If you guys have questions or anything that you think, excuse me, anything that you think we could address maybe. All right, so financial barriers, yeah. Future renters and risk assessment, transportation challenges, yeah. So individuals,
Danielle, if I could jump in while we're seeing more responses, I guess I have a question. This may be mostly for Jenny, but interested to hear what you think. The law is supposed to make the eviction sealing process more automatic. So, is there anything that a tenant can do, from the moment that they see an eviction filed against them to help ensure that it stay automatic within the process? Does the tenant have any agency to try to steer that automatic nature, or is it really just all behind the scenes within the court process?
I definitely think that it helps tenants advocate for themselves, because let's face it, very few tenants do have legal representation going through this process. If they are aware of the ability to seal their case, it can help them make the best informed choices, to the extent they have some choices in the eviction case. And knowing, that they can ask for their case to be sealed, and just making sure that, the court and landlord knows that that's something that's of interest to them. This bifurcation process can sometimes, it is one way where the process is not maybe as smooth as it could otherwise be, but it is the legal process in Indiana. And so some tenants kind of have one path to seal an eviction if their case goes one way, and another path if it goes the other way. So while courts can't give legal advice to tenants, they might be able to kind of make sure tenants understand, what path they're on for sealing. So I definitely think it's helpful when tenants understand that this is an option.
So it looks like, a lot of feedback is that, the financial barriers, both for the tenant and, in accessing legal aid services is kind of the common answer here. We did have the question, or the statement that, depending on how fast it's sealed, that might be kind of a barrier challenge, and just educating the public. So hopefully this webinar is helpful in doing so. So I'm going to stop sharing that, and we are going to jump right back into our presentation here. Let's see. And I know we are a minute short of 11. We are open to staying on the call a few minutes longer to finish up our slides. If any of you have to drop off, we understand. We will send out this recording to everyone that was registered. All right. All right, so we had some time delegated for Q&A. So if you guys have questions, feel free to come off mute or throw your questions in the chat for us.
Yeah, just to maybe the one question that we saw on that last slide about how fast will evictions actually be sealed. We generally see that gets implemented pretty quickly. So, if we're talking about the current cases that will be eligible for the automatic eviction sealing, the court is going to address that in whatever order is before the court at that time. So, the same day that parties are in court, the court is going to include that in their order. And then, the court staff will enter that order into their system. And so, within a day or two, the court staff does have to make a few clicks on the computer when they enter that order. But other than that, it tends to get done very quickly. Now, if it's an instance where a tenant is filing a new petition to be sealed, that can take a little longer. It kind of depends on, what is the overall rest of the judge's schedule, because the judge is going to have to take a look at that. But, generally, again, we see those kind of things being handled, within a week, maybe 2 weeks at the most. Heard that Indianapolis has the highest eviction rate in the country. I have not heard that statistic, but it's certainly true that Indianapolis does have a high eviction rate. That Eviction Lab website, is limited to the communities where the court filing data is, accessible to the computer program. But, it's a high rate of eviction. Most
Jenny,
definitely.
if I could,
Yeah.
I think we're this you're right that I think that we hear this, and there's something behind this from the eviction lab data. They've done a few different things. What Jenny showed you earlier is they're using Indiana's court data to show eviction filings. They had previously and still have several ways to track evictions themselves, like actual judgments. And when they did that before the pandemic, they found that Indianapolis had the second highest sheer number of evictions of major cities in the country, behind only New York City. And obviously, Indianapolis is not nowhere near the second biggest city in the nation. So in terms of raw numbers, it was second highest. And then also Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, and South Bend were also in the top 20 in terms of highest eviction filings in the country. And that's kind of astounding that we have 3 of the top 20 in the nation. I had looked at that data, and then if you look further down at small towns and rural areas, there are small towns and rural areas that have higher eviction rates than even the largest cities, according to that data. So we know that this is an issue that really predates the pandemic and inflation costs that have recently happened in recent years. We track it back to a lack of policies to increase the supply of safe, stable, and affordable housing, and then a lack of policies to protect tenants when they're in their homes and to keep them in their homes. And so with all that, that is another reason why we are involved in this issue. That whether we're Indianapolis is second highest in the nation anymore or not, we know that Indiana continues to have a real housing shortage, and it really is prevalent in urban, suburban, and rural places throughout the state.
It looks like we had a question from Amy Nelson. Do you know how the eviction lab is tracking ethnicity and race and gender of their eviction filings? I don't believe the courts are collecting that information. So are they making educated guesses based on the names or something else, or are the courts tracking?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, Amy, but I will see if I can find out and share it with you.
And I'm not sure either. And I think you might be onto something. I'm not sure if they are, those are 2 different ways of tracking information, if they're not necessarily connected to each individual court case or not.
Good question. All right. If you have other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to move ahead just because we are over on our time. All right, Andrew, I don't know if you want to take this slide.
Sure, and we'll do this very quickly, but this is an opportunity. So, you'll get a copy of the slides, but get your phone out right now if you want to be able to take action. These are 3 different ways that people watching can help us in this larger effort. On the left is we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to become a member of Prosperity Indiana. When we're creating this webinar in late August of 2025, we're in our the process of creating our policy priorities for 2026. And you can be part of that process if you're a current member. I encourage you to take our policy survey. That's how we get direct feedback from our members, and that's what ends up on our policy agenda. So that's the first QR code. The second one there, I mentioned that we help extend the reach of our membership by convening issue-based coalitions, including the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition, which really helped us drive this issue forward to be able to pass Senate Bill 142. Would love to have you be part of that and our other coalitions, so encourage you there. And then the third, as I've been alluding to, Indiana has this larger structural problem of a lack of safe, stable, and affordable housing. And there are resources out there, but they're not necessarily lined up in the most efficient way. So Prosperity Indiana and the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition are currently in the process of circulating a petition to urge Governor Mike Braun to create and convene a commission on housing safety, stability, and affordability, to line up those resources, make sure that the recommendations are driven by the people that are closest to the issue, and then to push forward on additional recommendations. We've had over 700 people sign that petitions so far. Every time that we have somebody new complete an action alert, he gets an additional ping telling him housing is a top priority, and we want to make sure that he has every opportunity to be Indiana's first housing governor. So those are my opportunities for people today to take action now and then stay involved in these discussions and effort in the long run.
Thank you, Andrew. So this next slide here is just some upcoming events that we have. Andrew, didn't you have another webinar that you wanted to mention though?
Yeah, and this one is so new that we don't yet have it on our website, but mark your calendar and then come back to our website. On the 11th of September, Prosperity Indiana and the National Low Income Housing Coalition are going to do a members only webinar where we're going to get under the hood of that housing data we looked at before. We have the rate of affordable housing, rate of severe housing cost burden, the dollar amount and the hours that it takes to work the jobs to afford housing. We have that at the state, the county, the metro level, and we're going to have the national experts from National Low Income Housing Coalition talk with us and talk with members about how they can use that information in the operation of their programs, in the way they serve clients, in the way they're projecting for future services. So it's going to be a really great opportunity to get the most out of that information.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And so there's two other upcoming events here listed on the screen. Our Rural Housing Development Summit that is taking place on September 10th in Shelbyville, for those of you who are interested in that. And then also we are having our next housing navigation training, which I host in September, starting on the 15th. And I think there's just a couple spots left if you are interested. All right, so here are some resources from our webinar today for you guys to access. So please check those out. And then also here is our contact information. And this will be sent to you, like Andrew said, so you can check this out and have it as a reference. And so last but not least, thank you all for being here, and thank our speakers very, very, very much for being here and sharing your wisdom and your expertise. It looks like we do have, oh, I saw, never mind, Jenny, you answered the question in the chat. So if anybody has any other questions, we can stay on here for a few minutes and answer any other questions that you guys have. Otherwise, feel free to drop off, and thanks again for being here.
Thanks so much again to Jenny and to Mike for joining us. And thank you, Danielle, for putting this together with us.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you guys. All right.
Okay.